What's up, Dolphins? I'm Jim Greasehaber. Call me Grease. The Fins are one and done at the trade deadline.
Hey, I'm Jess Ganina. Yes, one and done. But let's see what that draft pick brings us in the future.
Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, and eager to evaluate the rest of this season with a little bit of pressure on everybody left in-house after the big move, the biggest move, which was the one that came on Friday with the dismissal of Chris Grier.
Fins up. It's the Dolphin Squad. Everything Miami Dolphins, every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from South Beach. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Sunshine, speed, and squad goals. The Dolphin Squad Show starts now.
Look at us back after the 6-day hiatus following the Ravens debacle on Thursday Night Football that we thought would lead to wholesale changes. Now, whatever your definition of wholesale changes might be, hey, you might consider it to be wholesale changes with the dismissal, as Kyle said, of GM Chris Grier and the trade of Jaelan Phillips, but not Jalen Waddle. Those were the two names, and Bradley Chubb, of course, thrown in there as well. It's Grease, it's Z, it's Kyle. It is the Squad Show. And guys, man, what a busy week. We're going to dive right into it in just a second. But first, want to let everybody know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, that'd be you. You get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app with FanDuel on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Want to remind you we're live on YouTube, and then after the show, we upload, you download Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Podbean, and of course, OTT. Yeah, you know me. It's Roku as well. We have so much to talk about. Look at the Gettysburg Address I wrote for the rundown on this, like the PTI rundown. 1,000 topics on the show today. Z's first reaction was, wow, you got a lot of bleep over there. So here we are, Z. I'm going to give you first crack at it because Kyle's probably tired of talking about all this a little bit by now. But your thoughts initially, the dismissal of Chris Grier. It's our first show since then. The trade of Jaelan Phillips, and nobody else, with Mike McDaniel staying put, at least for now.
Well, I mean, the writing was on the wall kind of for Chris. You know, we've been talking about it, I don't know, since week 2, you know, after the first loss, we've been talking about it. And you know, it was time to come, you know, and, you know, Ross thought it was a good time to do before the trade deadline and see if we could shake it up a little bit. Now, as for the trades, I thought there'd be more. And I was hoping there'd be more. Because again, another thing we've been talking about is all that dead money next year. So I'll start dumping some contracts, you know, some players with big contracts. Hopefully get some draft picks because, you know, having draft picks that's, you know, lower salaries, you know, as long as you draft well, you know, and, you know, that's something we'll talk about, you know, from now until the draft and, you know, in end of April. So, but, you know, I was hoping we get some more leeway there and get some more picks and get rid of some contracts for next year.
The only thing I can think of, Kyle, is, I mean, you wanted to bring something back and you move a guy like Phillips, didn't get a ton for him. Obviously, it doesn't make you better at all this year. And Mike McDaniel coaching for his job with an interim GM, obviously, and probably a whole new team coming in place next year. Maybe a new head coach. We don't know. Stephen Ross reportedly really likes Mike McDaniel, thinks he can still be the coach of this team. But my takeaway, and I'm curious to get yours in this context, is my takeaway is they didn't move too many guys because you have a whole new group of people coming in the offseason, at least to run the front office, right? A new GM coming in, and you want to let that person make the moves because you don't trust the guy you have in here on an interim basis, and you clearly either didn't trust Chris Grier, whatever you believe, or he just didn't want to move anybody, and you just didn't agree with that. So to me, I just want to get your thoughts on staying pat, for the most part. Obviously had a huge ask for Jalen Waddle. That was part of it, but just let it all settle, see what they do the rest of the year, and let the new people do what they want with what you have left.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different layers to this. As far as the decision on Grier, the Sun Sentinel's Dave Hyde, who's one of the longest tenured guys on the beat, had some pretty good insight on this. He went on with Alan Poupere of the All Dolphins podcast, and Alan does SI. And Dave Hyde had said, and I'm reading a direct snippet off of their conversation, that if you guys are interested, it's episode 590 of All Dolphins podcast. You check that out. There's enough room here at the table for everybody to eat, and highly recommend this particular show for the insight and the conversation between Alan and Dave. But The only surprise was what I was told why happened. This was Dave Hive to Alan Pupar, which was Steve Ross wanted some answers on what they were going to do with the deadline, and Chris hadn't made calls, and his idea was to let people call him. And I think at 2-7, Ross obviously wanted somebody a little bit more proactive. So that was the final straw, not the reason he was fired. It was the last thing that happened to push Ross over the edge. When you consider who they moved Jaelan Phillips. What was the big difference with Jaelan Phillips and the other guys that were talked about? And I've only really put this together this morning as I'm sitting here and continuing to digest everything versus Jalen Waddle, Bradley Chubb, and Minkah Fitzpatrick as the other popular names that were referred to. He's the only expiring contract of that group. Everybody else is under contract in 2026 to play for the Dolphins as things currently stand. Now you could get to hiring a new GM and he could come in and say, cap casualty, cutting this guy. I still want to try to trade that guy, yada, yada. You didn't have a decision to make on Jaelan Phillips because he was going to be an expiring contract. So your options were either trade him now or you were going to let the season play out. And then a new GM was going to come in with a very small window to decide, I want to either extend or franchise tag this guy, or he's walking and that's it. And I think that for me, as I kind of reflect on, Rasul Douglas had some rumored interest as a corner, as a vet minimum player, as a post-30 corner. Right? You were probably going to get a 7 there, right? So, okay, you don't want to make that move. I'm totally fine with that. I think there was probably an opportunity with the Bradley Chubb contract where he's got incentives that he's playing for that might cost you more money. That's the one that burns my rear end a little bit. But if you only moved the expiring contract because you weren't going to have any grace for somebody, whoever takes the full title as GM, as I process the post-deadline action, that's where I've kind of made peace with a lot of a one and done is you made the move you had to because of his contract situation.
Yeah, and they get a third-round pick as opposed to letting them walk for nothing, Z, at the end of the year. You've been through this before. You've talked about it on the show where you lost your 2 starting defensive ends at the deadline one year as a D-line coach, and we'll get to picking up the pieces a little bit later in the show. But third-round pick for Phillips right now, obviously, I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like maybe a second would have been better for a guy like him. He's really going to help Philadelphia a lot. They truly need an edge rusher. But when I think about what Kyle said, the expiring contract, the rebuild, guy's probably not going to stay here anyway. And even if he wanted to, where's the money? Where are you going to find the money for him? So do you feel like they did well with getting a third-round pick for Phillips?
I think they did. I mean, again, like you said, they probably couldn't afford him, even with the franchise tag next year, with the way the cap is going to be with all the dead money. So, I mean, that probably came into effect. And he's been hurt. And he's not like he's going out there and putting up numbers this year. He's got some good solid tape, but he doesn't have the numbers. When I lost Sweat had like 5 or 6 sacks at the time, and we got a high second-round pick for him. And Chase we got a third round for.
What team?
You didn't have numbers.
Skins, right? At the time,
Skins or Commanders, yeah.
They were the Commanders already, or were they the Skins still back then?
We were the Commanders. It was the last year there, so we already went through the Redskins, the Washington football team, the WTF. So I would say what the, all the time because that's what it seems like. And, and then we were the Commanders, So, but yeah, again, they were told, by the owner that they wanted to trade one of the guys. He came all the way from upstairs and, they traded both of them,
Z spent all that time playing for the Dolphins, and I've followed and covered the Dolphins a long time, but Kyle, you truly bleed for the Dolphins. You're a Dolphin fan for life. You say it all the time, unapologetically, and you really have to be a fan at this point. There's nobody who's going to say, oh, you're a front runner. You like the Dolphins. Those days went with Don Shula and probably 80s Don Shula, early 80s Don Shula, if we're telling the truth. But what do you think of all this when you look at the Jets? And I'll bring them in for context here. They traded so many guys and they got so many picks. I mean, you look at the Jets for the next couple of years in the first and second round, you still have to make those picks, right? But at the same time, so many Dolphins look at this as a blow up. They look at it as a complete teardown and rebuild. And to trade one guy for a third round pick, there's a lot of people who aren't happy at all about that. What are your thoughts with that? Just getting the third round pick back versus what you're looking at what the Jets did, because you're pretty much right there with the Jets right now with the 2 wins. So you look at it, how do you compare the two? How do you look at what they did and what the Dolphins didn't do? And how do you assess all that?
Well, the big difference is the Jets made the changes this past offseason and have a brand new head coach and a brand new general manager that they brought in at the same time and are organizationally aligned, and they understand they have a runway to work with because they're in the first year and they've been working with this nucleus of team and trying to get everybody to buy in. And despite that, and the culture you're trying to instill, you're 1-7, right? Like, so you kind of see the writings on the wall. Hey, this is going to take a while. Where you had a GM that was dismissed 3 days before the trade deadline and a coach that's still trying to coach for his job. They're not going to blow it up. They're just not. And I don't think organizational shifts have to come with, we need to get rid of every good player on the roster, and the Dolphins did that in 2019. And the morning shows were talking about how we need to get OSHA involved for the safety of the players on the field because they're not talented enough to be on an NFL field. Like, those conversations actually happened on national broadcast television. And you saw what they did with the picks, right? It doesn't guarantee you anything. It gives you flexibility. And I think what the Dolphins are doing from here, well, I'd have been pissed if they traded Jaelan Phillips for full disclosure. I think that would have been a massive mistake because you drafted your last quarterback and it was Tua Tagovailoa, and he came and he was throwing a Preston Williams, Devontae Parker, Lynn Bowden Jr., Isaiah or Alan Hearns. There's a bunch of guys that didn't stand a chance to be long-term answers for you. Jakeem Grant, he had that big drop against Cincinnati that everybody remembers on what could have been a big bomb when the first 2 years when everybody said Tua couldn't throw a deep pass, they used the incomplete pass to Jakeem Grant because he dropped it on the logo. So I don't mind a roster rebuild that doesn't tear your roster down to the studs, as long as you're smart about who are the long-term building blocks that we can work around that 2 years from now are still going to be at the top of their game. And I think Jalen Waddle can be one of those players. And that's why for me, the one that burned me up was Bradley Chubb, because he's got more money to earn on the field, and he's an age 30 player who's owed $20 million next year in non-guaranteed salary. Nobody's going to trade for that. So your appeal to trade for him was, at the beginning of this year, you restructured his contract down for cap space. A team was looking at somewhere between $2 and $5 million, depending on the performance incentives, would have been what they would have brought on to get something for him. So I'm not mad that the Dolphins didn't blow it up with every half-decent player on the roster, because I think while the Jets have a lot to be excited about, if they have good process and they pick the right players, they're going to be really competitive in 2027 and 2028. But that's a long ways away. There's a lot of unknown that comes with that. And as Dolphins fans learned the hard way in 2019, 2020, 2021, it doesn't guarantee you anything. And if anything, in some ways, you're putting your roster at a further back starting point to even climb back to where you were in the first place. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. The Jets fans should be really excited about where they're at. Dolphins fans, the way I'm going to go to sleep tonight is I'm going to know there's going to be organizational change at the top of the food chain for this team, no matter what, because they already committed to changing a general manager. And I think that's a massive first step, regardless of whether you have 3 first-round picks next year, 1 first-round pick next year, or whatever. And 5 top 100 picks is 1 less than they made in 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025 combined. So no, they don't have Jets picks, but they next year in April have 1 less draft choice in the top 100 than they made in their previous 4 draft classes combined. I'm cool with that. That's good with me.
All right. And Z, the other thing is, look, you're in that. No, we're not in that room, but if you're in that room and you're thinking about making these moves, and I have to imagine Mike was a lot more involved without Grier than he would have been with him or was with him, and we don't know for sure. But you have your asking price, and you say we'll trade this guy, and we want a 3rd rounder, and so Philly comes in with a 3rd rounder for Phillips, and you say, okay, they met our price, we'll take it. Now you look at Chubb, you look at Waddle. Reportedly, their asking price was very high for Waddle, as it should have been. He's a number 1 receiver on this team. And then for Chubb, right? So you're in that room and you say maybe, hey, if we get what we want, we'll do it. If not, we stand pat. And I actually have a lot of respect for that. It's like selling a house, selling a car. Hey, if they give me $350,000, I'll sell it. Well, it's 2020. If they give me $850,000, I'll sell it tomorrow. If they don't, I'm staying here.
Yeah, I don't know how. I would really like to know the truth about the Chubb, what pick it was. You could say it was high just to save face, but I think because of the contract and the money owed, I think if they could have got out of that deal moving forward, they would have got out of it. I don't think anybody was really that interested in Chubb, within reason. Now Waddle, yes. I mean, you got to stand pat on that. You don't have a receiver coming back really for next year, with that caliber, because Tyreek probably won't be back because of the money and maybe because of the injury. So you got to keep at least a one wide receiver in the building, because again, if you get rid of Mike, you got to have some pieces to attract a coach, a good quality coach. Because I don't know how many, these good quality coaches are going to come in here and want to do a complete rebuild, right off the bat, and know that it's going to take 2-3 years because you have the salary cap issues. You rely on a lot of young players and a lot of players that are here that you really don't want, So you got to keep a couple pieces in the building to attract a good coach.
All right, we're going to pick that up on the other side with Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, former Dolphins defensive lineman Jeff Scanina. 27 years as a player and a coach in the NFL. We get him this year right here on the Dolphins Squad Show. I'm Jim Greasehaber. Call me Grease. Break one coming up. We pick it right back up on the other side with the Waddle and Chubb talk, the future for Mike McDaniel, the future of the Dolphins. And Kyle already alluded to it a little bit. We'll pick it up with more from him on the other side. This is your Dolphins Squad Show on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, well, I get a chance to tell you about FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Heat going over most of the time so far this season. Even if you missed the start of the game, though, and you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, here we are back on the Squad Show. That's Z, that's Kyle, I'm Grease, and Kyle, right to it. Pick up on what Z said about Chubb, if you would, because you seem to have that same mindset. And for Z, who's a defensive lineman and a defensive line coach, to say, hey, I don't know why they held on to this guy from an on-field standpoint. And then you talking about the money that he makes and the money that he could make with bonuses and things like that. Why do you think he's still here?
Yeah, I'd like to first start. I like Bradley Chubb. I think when healthy, he's a good player. I think he's still knocking some of the rust off from missing all year last year. He's obviously a great leader. It's just the intersection of where this team is going and where he is at in his career and the implications of you ate $5 million of what was left on Phillips's contract to buy that draft pick up to a third-round pick. And what's probably potentially going to be a one-year rental for Philadelphia. You could have offset most of that if you moved off Phillips. If you told me teams weren't interested, I'd say, yeah, I think the incentives in his contract makes it a little muddy. I could maybe buy that versus some of the alternatives across the league. But Ian Rappaport said after the deadline passed yesterday that the Dolphins held firm on their price. They didn't want to have a fire sale price on Bradley Chubb. I'd have done a late round pick swap and had him in that piece of the puzzle just because I think the financials element of it for Miami and offloading and starting to offload some cash that is going to reduce what you have to roll over and how much dead money you have to eat and what you can take from this year's cap if you don't use it and apply it to next year. All that stuff matters because you're going to have a lot of flexibility because you're going to be moving off some big salary cap figures, and a large percentage of your salary cap is going to be ate up on players no longer on the team. So that for me is part of the reason why for me it would have been one that you could have told me you'd have got any offer. Come on now, we're 2-7. Like this season is what it is. We know what this year is going to be. It doesn't behoove you. Now, I think what is interesting is Mike McDaniel at his press conference today and talked. It was him, Champ Kelly, and Brandon Shore, who's the guy who does a lot of the cap and the contracts, who are part of all the trade deadline conversations. And Mike being in that room, what's the mandate on Mike? You got to keep this team playing hard for it, and you got to win games. We want this to work, but you need to win games. You think Mike's in those conversations supporting that they're going to trade their second pass rusher when he's got a mandate that he's got to win football games? Probably not. So if it's a 6th round draft choice that you get for Bradley Chubb to offload $5 million in cash off the payroll, Mike knows he's coaching for his job. He's probably not too keen on that. So I'm sure that's part of the conversation that they had to weigh out through all things.
No, exactly, Kyle. I agree with you. That's what I meant by, I don't know what that, being so high. Again, if someone's going to give me a 6th or 7th, a 5th, if I'm lucky, for Bradley Chubb in that contract, I'm shipping him out. I wasn't talking about the player. I was talking about that contract. That's where I was like, I think he's a good football player. He's good for the team. He's playing with some good energy, even when we're losing. But that contract next year, and if we're going to rebuild this team, because we're going to have to rebuild this roster, we need the space, and that's why I'm saying, I don't know how much interest was it there, because again, somebody gave me a 6 for that dude, or even a high 7th. I'm looking at the future. I'm not looking at the present.
What about the development of Chop, number 1, Chop Robinson, Z, as a defensive line coach and a defensive lineman yourself? What about his development? Maybe real good mentorship from Chubb. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. We're not inside there, but you trade away those two guys, and you'd think Chubb would be a better mentor than Phillips at this point in their careers for those younger players. And think about, A, what you'd be left with if you trade them both, but B, the development of Chop Robinson and some of the other younger guys, and Chubb's maybe his role in sticking out this year in the development of Robinson maybe.
Well, yes, as a coach, yes, you think it that way. Like, you want the veteran, if he's a good locker room guy. Again, I don't know how he is there, everything. I interviewed him at the combine when I was on with another team. Loved the kid, loved his work ethic, loved his tape, Again, as a coach, yes, you love when a guy takes the younger guys on, teaches them, how to be a pro, teaches them the ins and outs and the techniques and all that. That's great. But as a front office guy, you're looking at draft picks. You know what I'm saying? So again, if you're talking to me as if I'm a GM, I'm looking at a good draft pick and looking at my bottom line for next year. I'm not worried about if he's a mentor or not for the young guys.
Well, Kyle, you're going to get your wish. We're going to see a lot more Chop. You've been talking about it all year, and we're going to see what we have in him and his development this year. He could really take a big step forward with this additional playing time and being a more important player on the team, and that always helps. And obviously, we know what Z said about the front office versus the coaches and versus the players in the locker room. So to me, keeping Mike McDaniel, letting Chris Grier go, and then only trading one guy, these are very strong in my mind. I don't know how you feel about this, but these are strong votes of confidence for Mike McDaniel in the future, are they not?
I think everything's still on the table, personally, where I know what Stephen Ross, you could tell by the reports that come out what Stephen Ross wants to happen. But if you come out and you get smoked by Buffalo and the stands keep looking like what they look like on Thursday night with a very unhappy fan base and a very poorly attended fan base, see if they show the wide shot of what this stadium looks like this game for week 10 or a 1:00 kick, and how much red, white, and blue you see in the stands versus how much aqua and orange you see in the stands, because that fan base travels and they love coming down here, and they have had all the success in the world against our team. Boy, I hope we don't start slow against this team on Sunday, because if they do, it might make Thursday night look like small potatoes. Now, it won't be a nationally televised game in the standalone game, so the profile probably won't be as big, but I think the product has to turn around. Like, if we keep going on the trajectory that they're on, no matter how much Steve Ross would like things to change, I think it will end up facilitating wholesale changes when it's all said and done.
Especially with the Bills coming off. I mean, and they're acting like they chill out, Buffalo. You're acting like you won the damn Super Bowl because you finally beat the Chiefs in a regular season game. Do it in the playoffs, then we'll talk. So maybe you might catch them in a lull, Z. But I have to ask you, as a player, as a coach, but more specifically with this as a player, man, when you see a guy like Phillips go and you're expecting maybe more guys to go, maybe your coach was going to get fired, your GM. I don't think the players really care if the GM gets fired. I could be wrong. But in terms of the players' reaction to the moves that were made and weren't made, how do the guys feel in the locker room about this? And how will all of this together affect anything performance-wise Sunday?
Oh, well, again, like these trades now, they're more prevalent now in this day and age than it was when I played. It was very rare that you got an in-season trade when I was playing. Very rare. I think as a player, I think maybe twice it happened. And once was like my rookie year, they traded oh God, I can't think of the running back from Georgia. Anyway, they traded him away middle of the season. And then another time was a wide receiver when I was in St. Louis. I think they traded. But besides that, there were a lot of trades. Now, again, it's business though. Yeah, the first day back in the building, practice, it stinks, Again, when they traded Montez Sweat when I was in Washington, it was right when we were getting ready to break down the tape Monday, breakdown, watching the game the day before. Like we went to walkthrough and he never came in to walkthrough. Agent called him on the way to walkthrough and walking across the parking lot. And he stopped and he went back, put his clothes on and left, and that was it. You just say to the players, it is what it is. It's a business. You just get used to it after a while, especially nowadays where there's a lot more trades. People are moving around. So, you just get next man up. It's no matter different, like say, well, the guy's on IR now and he's not coming back. That's how you got to look at it.
That's interesting with the players. And from that standpoint, I mean, just an opportunity now to really play for a coach. And obviously the players really like Mike and he hasn't lost them. I mean, the effort was there against the Ravens. The self-destruction has got to stop. That's for sure. The penalties, the mistakes and things like that, but they definitely came out. They were executing on offense early, at least moving the ball down the field. The one guy we haven't talked about, Kyle, and there was no way they were going to trade him this year. Maybe next year, though, there is a scenario possible to move Tua in the offseason to a team that's quarterback hungry and looking for another reclamation project. Every time you see a Mac Jones, every time you see a Sam Darnold, maybe there's somebody out there, like Dr. Dre said, a fool and his dough soon split. So when you come across a fool, get all that you can get. Maybe you can find somebody in the offseason who thinks they can reshape Tua and remake him into an elite NFL quarterback. But we kind of knew pretty much for sure that he wasn't going to be moved at this deadline.
Yeah, those financials didn't add up. The running back you were thinking of was Tim Worley. Was the name of it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you. I knew you'd get it, Kyle.
I was working on it there as you guys were talking.
I saw the wheels turning, Kyle. I saw him.
Like, as far as Tua goes, you kind of heard some. Once Grier was dismissed, you kind of heard some of this start over this past weekend with again another Ian Rappaport report talking about Tua is effectively playing for his starting job. And they did kind of set the stage that depending on how far down the changes go, if Mike McDaniel goes, you could be looking at a scenario where they potentially pay off some of his salary to get a team to take a portion of the contract because you're into the rolling guarantees window now where a team could bring on a partial salary, but then they could make the decision after 1 year to have him as a bridge quarterback. And then his cash flow in 2027 is significantly lower than what it was in 25 and 26. So, that is a big part of this offseason conversation. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how a lot of these quarterback hungry teams shake things out, because I don't think there's going to be enough in this draft class to go around. And a lot of the reclamation guys signed multiple year contracts. Like Mac Jones signed a 2-year contract in San Francisco, and he's been the starter for the vast majority of this year and has looked good. Right. So, San Francisco, are they at a point where they'd have any of those conversations about Brock and lean into Mac because of the cost difference? And it's not an enviable place to live because of the unpredictability of it. And the Dolphins, I think you have to be mentally prepared to take a bath on the finances here regardless, unless you're going to run him back and he's going to be your bridge quarterback that starts. But I think that becomes more or less likely depending on what you choose to do with Mike McDaniel. What does the relationship look like at the end of the year, right? Where you could tell it's not the same as it was in the first couple of years that Mike got here. You've even heard some of the NFL insiders talking about how Mike has it really hard. He has to call his offense for a quarterback with limitations who can't take hits, and he can't do all the things he wants to do because of his quarterback. That's coming from somewhere, right? And it's probably coming from somewhere related to somebody having a vested interest in Mike staying as the head coach of the football team, because now you're looking at scapegoating Tua. So it's very messy. And again, that goes back to every time we have this conversation. For me, it's clean slate, organizational alignment. It's so important. It becomes really difficult for me to get excited about the outcomes that have Tua back when you're hiring a coach and a GM with Tua back next year, or not giving them the freedom to move on from him, or moving on from Tua and keeping Mike for an extra year and letting him pick his own quarterback with a GM that's coming out. And now you're tired of a GM to make a decision, but how much personnel control does the head coach say when he's kind of, if you don't move on from him, it gets so messy. So I think you absolutely have to keep it in your mind that those exit opportunities that do and don't exist for Tua, like I'd expect they'll explore them, and they'll, depending on how deep the changes go, potentially to probably go after one of those exit opportunities.
All right. Well, we'll pick
Kyle,
this up.
let me ask Kyle one quick question.
Real quick, Z, we're up against the break. We got to hit the break, so we'll pick that up.
Do it come back.
Right when we come back. And then I want to talk about the Broncos just did that with Bo Nix in the wings with Sean Payton. They just did that with Russell Wilson. The same thing Kyle just talked about with Tua. Do the Dolphins have their own Bo Nix and Quinn Ewers? He launched his own brand this week. He better be able to play. We'll pick that up on the other side. It's your Dolphin Squad show on the Locked On Podcast Network. Z, Kyle, and Grease. We'll be right back after Kyle tells you about one of our sponsors, Built, as the Bills come in.
Nobody likes paying rent, but if you must, you might as well get something for it. That's where Built comes in. Built is changing the game by turning your rent payment into real rewards that you can actually use. When you pay through Built, you earn flexible points that can be redeemed towards hundreds of hotels and airlines, future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But Built isn't just about rent. It's about rewarding you and your entire neighborhood. Built has everyday life points to help make your everyday items and transactions and travel more accessible to you, all by capitalizing on that rent payment every month that you have to make regardless. So turn your rent into rewards and start earning points around your neighborhood by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL to make sure to use that link so that they know we sent you.
Oh, come on. All right. Buttons are sticking everywhere. I don't even have any buttons. It's a touchscreen. All right, that's Z. That's Kyle. I'm Grease. Let's pick it up right where we left it off with Z going right back to Kyle on the Tua situation.
Do you see him pulling like a Atlanta thing, with Penix and the other, Cousins?
I could see them maintaining Tua on the contract and drafting somebody with their early draft choice. I think there's on the scale and spectrum of possible outcomes, I'd probably say that that's pretty high up if they finish in a position to draft one of those guys organically, right? Because I don't think you're in a position with the rest of the roster being what it is to ship all your draft picks out to trade up and draft the quarterback, because now you're bringing a guy into a bad situation anyway. But if the guy that you really like is there and you don't find the exit opportunity for Tua, I would take the quarterback and I'd have Tua on the roster. And then you can, it almost frees it up more for trade scenarios if you get after June 1st. Now, who's going to be in the quarterback market June 1st? Does that help you? Does that hurt you? Does that mean you have to pay more of the salary? Does it put you in a position where you can ask a team to take on more of the salary? I don't know. But if Tua was the bridge quarterback here, and he was on the contract because he was going to get his money regardless, and we couldn't find a taker, like, I would not let being handcuffed in that situation prevent you from drafting a quarterback, because if you do the rest of this thing right, I don't think that, like, because you kept the Jalen Waddles of the world and the Jordan Brookses of the world and the Chop Robinsons of the world and the Patrick Pauls of the world, and you have some pieces, if you make a good head coach hire, if you change coach, I don't think you're going to be bad enough to organically be picking at the top of the draft in 2027 anyway. So if you have one you like, I would take advantage of the opportunity to draft that guy this year if you're in a position to do so.
That doesn't sound like an endorsement for Quinn Ewers. We'll talk about more about that in a second. But I wonder, is Russell Wilson, Z, this generation's Drew Bledsoe, where it just happens to be Tom Brady and Tony Romo who push him out? Maybe, maybe not, with Bo Nix and Jackson Dart. Russell Wilson might be washed. It might be a combination of the two, but also maybe other offensive-minded coaches around the league are looking at Tua and going, if Mike McDaniel can't do it, and he's one of the top offensive minds in the game, if he can't get it out of him, then who can? But still, even with that, with Sean Payton, they got the Giants to get to, obviously Russell Wilson went to New York. So when I think about somebody else taking a shot with Tua, when I think about what they have in-house, have you seen, and we saw him in the preseason, we saw him a little bit in a regular season game, but Quinn Ewers, that game at Cleveland, he drops the first snap and they drop an interception on his first throw.
Yeah, it wasn't a good first outing for him, But again, it's not just a quarterback here now. You got to remember this O-line is banged up and not very good right now. We're giving up, pressures left and right, So it's hard to put a young quarterback back there when, he plants his foot and there's like people in his face. I'm not making excuses for anything, but again, this is like not just a quarterback issue here all the way. We don't get our run game going half the time. So it puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback, So you need a quarterback back there who's going to be able to do, timing, which that's what Tua does. He puts his foot down the ground, throws. You got to continually do that, Again, in a couple of weeks, you're probably going to see more of the young kid, just to see what he is and see what we have,
Kyle?
Yeah, it's I agree with where Z's at, where this is not a situation that I think lends itself very favorably to playing a young guy. And Quinn, I know everybody's eager to see them because there's a group of the fan base that's just tired of watching Tua play quarterback for the Dolphins. And the outing against Cleveland, to your point, Grease, drop snap, hot protections where we're caught off guard with being hot. We do hit the ball down the field, but the sustainability of it is ugly. But that's where we've had these conversations around Mike McDaniel and Tua, and we know there's a GM change. And do you keep both those guys going into next year? Do you keep one of those guys going into next year? Do you flush the system and get rid of all of them? If you have any intent on bringing one or the other back and you sit Tua down where he's no longer starting this year, that is you cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube scenario for me. Like, if you're going to try to bring Mike McDaniel and Tua back and you bench Tua at the end of the year, I don't know how that's going to work. That's just begging for trouble, right? So if you've become resided to whatever plan we choose and whatever plan we make, one of these two guys is going and you want to see what Quinn Ewers looks like, great, make that change. But you better be convicted that you're prepared to pay $50-something million for Tua to go away, or you better be convicted that you're firing the head coach. Because if you make that swap and then you say, hey, guys, smooth it over, no hard feelings, rough year, let's go get him next year, good luck with that. Because that is cutting your nose off to spite your face if you try that.
Z, I'm just going to go point blank on Tua. As a player and a coach here with you, I heard someone say this week, and I can't remember who it was, but it's been echoed by many people on the national level. I watch so many shows, and you hear the same blah, 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 and it's what they have to do. But they were talking about Tua. He doesn't have the arm. They were talking about Tua and the stupid things he said to lose the locker room. One of the biggest things about this kid when he came out, and he's not a kid anymore, but when he came out was his leadership, was the intangibles that he brought to the game, the winning on the collegiate level, the ability to get a team to rally behind him and be a leader of men, none of which seems to be there anymore. So I imagine a lot of what goes into the choices here are going to have to do with how he's done with the locker room. And I've seen reports that he's lost Mike McDaniel to some degree. So his biggest strengths have turned into his biggest weaknesses, in my opinion. And he's never had the arm to begin with, which is why you'd never bring in a guy like Brock Purdy after Tua, because you dink and dunker to dink and dunker. It doesn't work. But as far as Tua goes, are there any redeeming qualities left with this guy? And you just don't seem to see the hunger in him to want to take the accountability and move forward as the leader of this team without A, sounding meek at the podium, or B, throwing other people under the bus.
Well, yeah, I mean, he hasn't done himself any justice this year, both playing and at the mic. He's kind of put his foot in his mouth on both avenues. Somehow he's got to find a way get the, guys to rally behind him. And, that's going to be hard. The best thing you do is be able to go out there and just take care of the football. No more turnovers, get rid of the ball on time, and keep leading the team, by his play, not by his mouth. He's got to clean up his one part first, and that's got to be by his play. The only way to get a locker room back and guys in that locker room to follow you is to make the plays that are, asked of him. And if he doesn't do that, then there ain't no chance.
Kyle, do you think there's any way he turns it around here?
I don't think so. I kind of see a player who, to your point, with all the self-inflicted wounds, I also don't see a player that's progressing at this point. And, I had Kurt Warner on the show last summer talking about, he wasn't the most high tools quarterback either. And he talked about how his mental maturation and how he viewed the game. And, as a guy who wasn't a big time athlete and didn't have the strongest of arms, and he won with anticipation and accuracy. And as he got older, he got better at processing defenses and had to learn how to throw to new guys and all of those things that are happening with Tua this year. Are we getting better at any of it? I mean, we've dramatically regressed with the ball security and the turnovers, and the accuracies regressed this year in a number of areas that have been like his best areas before. So I just relate to that conversation. And I think about what you knew. Tua didn't have the highest floor from a physical traits and skill set to begin with. And now you're kind of at a point where you're seeing some of that stuff is even more limiting for him now. And I'm not seeing the growth in the areas that it needs to grow for me to have any level of confidence that this is going to sort itself out. And with the GM change already having happened, with the durability questions that exist, if he's going to be a franchise quarterback or a long-term starter for somebody, like, he might be here next year, but I don't think it's going to be with the Dolphins at this point.
Z, you played with Kurt Warner. What are the differences you see between the two?
Kurt had 5 dudes around him, man. First off,
he had Bruce
and an old line. Holy cow!
Right, but Tua had Tyreek and Waddle and Waller for part of the year. I mean, that's not chopped liver.
Okay, that's 3. We had a running back. We had a tight end. We had another wide receiver.
Some guys on that offensive line.
We had a left tackle who's in the Hall of Fame. We had Adam Timmerman, who was an All-Pro. We had our center was just okay, Grudoria. Then we had Tucker, the right tackle, and Tom Newton at their guard. We had dudes.
Oh, by the way, the coaching staff too.
Yeah, we had Mike Martz, and Dick Vermeil, and we had, we had a lot of dudes, across the board. So that helps, and then we had a great kickoff returner. So we're starting at the 40 a lot. The old school Red Rover, wedge, that I was in, So yeah, we had a better team, which helps. That's what Kurt,
between the two, or
but Kurt, talking to the offensive guys, I wasn't in those rooms with those guys, but they said Kurt threw a great ball. It was always on the right spot, and he was all about timing, and he would throw it, and he stood in the pocket. He took a beating, because that's what he was. He was a drop back pocket passer. He couldn't run, but he would take a beating back there, but he would launch the ball up, and it was perfectly thrown right in the breadbasket every time for those guys in stride.
Yeah, then he went to the Giants and wasn't really good at all. I mean, he got killed with them. Then Arizona with Bolden and Fitzy, and the Cardinals are dumb enough to let Anquan Bolden leave in his prime. And that was something that they made a Super Bowl run with Kurt, which put him in the Hall of Fame, doing it with 2 teams. But Kyle, I want to, before we wrap this segment and as we turn the corner toward the Bills, you talked about the possibility of maybe throwing it all in to draft a quarterback. I don't know if that guy's out there this year. And everybody loves Mendoza from Indiana and everything about him. But when I think about, man, I just don't know about anybody being there this year as a quarterback. And then also with all the help that they need up front on both sides of the ball, that's where I'd start with this draft.
Yeah, it's a multi-year build that you're going to need, and you're going to need to strip dead cap out. You're going to need to have good decisions in free agency. You're going to have to draft, and then you're going to have to make sure that you retain those guys and sign them early. And those are all key hallmark items. But if there's a guy that you really like, that you think you can build the offense around in your vision, and you're picking 5th, hypothetically, I'd be pro drafting that guy because, just because you earn the right to pick first, what's the success rate of guys that went first overall as quarterbacks, right? Like, how many of those guys authentically turn around? It's been Joe Burrow, right? But think about the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. When you say Josh Allen, the Bills traded up twice from the 20s to go up to 7 and drafted Josh Allen at 7. He was not one of the 3 top quarterbacks drafted in that class. What was Patrick Mahomes drafted? He was drafted 10th. The Chiefs traded up to 10 and got him. What was Lamar Jackson drafted? 32nd. The rest of the league passed on him. And then Baltimore passed on him for a tight end, Hayden Hurst. And then they traded up and got him. So for me, it's about the fit. It's about the style of player. And if you think you've got a guy that's well built to be the right player in the South Florida community with all the other things that there is to do, and he's able to tune out the noise of the media and all the pressure and all the things that happen with Dan Marino and how long it's been since Dan Marino, and we're still looking for the next real franchise guy, and he's got the traits that you want, and he's wired the right way, go for it. Get that, take advantage of being in a position to draft that player, whether that means he's starting as a rookie or if you have a bridge quarterback, if it's Tua, if it's somebody else, whatever. But this build's not guaranteed until you get the quarterback right. The Dolphins are a history lesson in that for 25 years with all the good players, all the Hall of Famers, all the All-Pros that have played here. You won't have a consistent winner until you get that position right. Period. So if you feel like that guy's there and the group is convicted that he's the right person, take him.
Well, we're up against a quick break, but I want to know if you think the guy's there. We have to take a quick break for the audio people only. Here on YouTube, it'll be a quick blip, but we are the Dolphin Squad Show. Z, Kyle, Grease, real quick, throw this in there, and we will be wrapping it up, talking about the Bills in just a second. All right, rolling on with your Dolphin Squad Show, Z, Kyle, and Grease. With the Bills coming into town, we're going to get to that in a second. Acting like they won the Super Bowl when they finally beat the Chiefs in the regular season. I guess maybe that will make it their Super Bowl with that mindset, but I don't think the team is feeling that way. That's the fans who are going to come in here and take over Hard Rock Stadium, we think, this Sunday. But, Kyle, when you look at the franchise, and such a great point you made, a franchise quarterback is everything in the NFL these days, and younger guys are coming in earlier than ever and having success. And I want to get Z's thoughts on that in a minute before we hit the Bills. But you see guys like Jackson Dart and Bo Nix and so many guys, Penix, playing really well early in their careers right now on the field in year 1 or year 2. And another one that I'll throw in there is J.J. McCarthy, who just beat the Lions on the road for the Vikings. So if you can find that guy, to your point, Kyle, yes, all day. But this year compared to the last 2 years, I don't see him. Do you?
I think it's impossible to tell because we don't know who the coach is going to be. What kind of offense are you going to run? Right? Like you could put Lamar Jackson.
Pure talent.
I think there's 3 guys that have talent that are eligible for this year's class. It's just one of them's a first-year starter in Ty Simpson in Alabama. I think Fernando Mendoza can be that guy. And I think the guy at Oregon, Dante Moore, reminds me a lot of C.J. Stroud. Now he's got 19 starts or whatever it is. Do you come out with, at the end of the season, if you have 20-something starts, do you end up coming out? If you're Ty Simpson and you're a 1-year starter? But I have to imagine some of these guys that have played well, they're going to look at all these names. Everybody says, oh, look at the 27 class, which they do every year, right? So, oh, look at the guys in next year's class. And they play that game annually. Every year, it's the next year's better. Some of these guys that play well, I have to imagine they're going to look at the blood in the water and they're going to say, hey, we do have a vacuum at the top of this year's quarterback class where maybe they're more situation specific. Simpson's really good at operating in the line of scrimmage, plays a very pro-translatable game, doesn't have the most tools. Mendoza has great accuracy, prototypical size. He's not the biggest athlete with the biggest arm, but guy who was Ivy League and then Cal. I don't think there's any concerns about the brain power to operate an NFL playbook, right? And then the other guy in Dante Moore was a prize recruit, went to UCLA, transfers to Oregon. The offensive infrastructure is exponentially better at Oregon, and he's making plays and looks like he's got great accuracy and he's got creativity and flair. I like Lenore Sellers, but he's super raw for me. I think that'd be a big time risk where you better be confident you have the infrastructure around them, and I don't know what that looks like. So there's a few guys. Now, if they all go back to school, they're all technically eligible to go back, and the best QBs are Garrett Nussmeier and Drew Aller, then yeah, don't go that route and force that. Just sign a Trey Lance in free agency, hypothetically. He's spent the last couple of years in Dallas after he got traded from San Francisco, and now he's with Jim Harbaugh in Los Angeles with the Chargers. Maybe he's the reclamation quarterback that you need. Maybe that can be your hedge at quarterback. But I don't think we're going to get to March and we're going to say, wow, it's the Kenny Pickett year all over again where there's just no talent in this year's class. I'd be very surprised if that was the case.
And no shot for Wilson or yours.
I don't want to say no shot on Zach Wilson because he was in his best offensive play calling situation before he went to Denver last year, and he kind of got a year under the wing of Sean Payton, was his rookie season with Mike LaFleur. And then they fired him, and the Jets were a hot mess. It made it impossible to evaluate. But you only signed Zach Wilson to a 1-year deal. So like now whoever's coming in has to make a fresh new decision. What do we have with Zach Wilson? As far as Quinn Ewers, never got better in college. I think he actually regressed the longer he went in college. He always had his own injury issues. He doesn't have the biggest, strongest arm. He's not the biggest build. I think he'd be a perfect hedge for the Mike McDaniel offense because Texas did a lot of things that overlapped and were similar to what you've seen Miami do the last couple of years. But putting eggs in that basket, or if you told me we're going to start Quinn Ewers all 2026, man, you couldn't get me enough liquor to get through the postcast shows because I don't know that I'd make it. That'd be a long year.
He's just being honest, and what a great job. Kyle's a draft guru as well, and breaking that down for us here on the show. We're spoiled, and maybe Sark's not the QB guru we thought he was with what happened with Ewers and now Arch at Texas. Who knows, right? I mean, who can even figure these things out anymore? But one thing we do know for sure, the Buffalo Bills are a very good team, very dangerous team coming in here this Sunday. The Dolphins coming off the long layoff, all the uncertainty. Grier's out, Phillips traded, everybody else staying. Some guys maybe hoping they would have been gone, and they're still here. And that happens, obviously, in the NFL. But the reality is the Dolphins have played the Bills competitively. Kyle corrected me last time, and I'll go with that because I stand corrected. Playing them well would have meant they might have won here and there. So I won't say they've played them well. They've played them competitively in each game. And I don't expect that to change this week with the Bills coming off a win over the Chiefs. Maybe they're a little inflated coming down to South Florida, thinking they get a little vacay game. The fan base is getting a vacay, coming down to South Beach, getting all liquored up for this one. What do you think about the Dolphins' ability to play the Bills tough, close, and possibly even grab a win this Sunday?
I mean, it's always a possibility. You know, they're all professional athletes. I get it. On paper, they have a better team, and record-wise, they have a better team. Their offense is fourth in the league, ranked fourth, and then their defense is not doing that well this year. I think they're 25th or 26th, somewhere down there at the bottom.
Can't tackle.
So yeah, exactly. So I mean, we gotta score some type of points at every drive, or at least get good long drives. And again, like we say every week, biggest thing is don't turn the ball over, and we got to get turnovers. I mean, look at Pittsburgh. They counted Pittsburgh out last week against Indy, right? They had 6 turnovers, and they beat Indy. That's what we got to have. We got to have the turnovers. If you don't have turnovers and you keep turning the ball over, you have no chance against anybody. I don't care who it is.
Kyle, what are your thoughts on this game as of right now?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if Miami won, but that's why you play the games on Sundays or Thursdays or Mondays, right? Like you still got to go out there and play the game. And if the Bills come in with their guard down, or if they're on their high horse because they beat Kansas City, or if Miami captures lightning in a bottle and makes a few critical plays. I mean, there's been games where teams have been grossly outproduced in the box score as far as moving the football. But to Z's point, if they turn the ball over, a missed kick here, a blocked field goal, a blocked punt, something on special teams, you never know. Now, the Dolphins have literally never had that bounce. You can think of all these one-score losses they've had to Buffalo the last 5-6 years. Most of them have that one play where it's like, hey, if this ball just bounces a little bit differently like this, maybe you steal that win, or maybe you get this win. That hasn't happened. So I'm not inclined to believe that it's going to this time around either, especially with the state of affairs around the team right now. But we'll see. And that's what I said at the very top of the show. First game with a major change at the top of the food chain with the GM that's out. Everybody kind of knows what time it is, right? So who plays like they know what time it is, and who's playing with pride, and who's playing with a motivation to want to put their best foot forward and make sure that their resume speaks for what their individual potential was. Now, I think where you're worried is if that leads to some more fracturing and guys looking out for themselves, or business decisions on the field, or not communicating, or trying to make a play happen, and then it breaks down. It's all part of the process the second half of the season. That's what we have to cling to if we're going to stay sane across these last 8 games.
Yeah, and all that recent history, of course, is almost a moot point because every team changes so much every offseason. So really just looking back at this year's game, and we'll get to correcting some of the mistakes right after this. But Z and Kyle, you don't need me in between you. Just Z, you first, then Kyle. What do you take from that first game in Buffalo where you were very competitive, but like Kyle said, play here, play there, ends up costing you the game? What can you take from that earlier in the season game in Buffalo, Z, that the Dolphins played against the Bills?
Well, you can show that, you're in the game up until the end when you had the turnover, really, So, defensively, you're making stops. You're playing some good football, and you're up there in a very hostile environment, in a national game, where everybody's watching and everything. And it was, you had success. You just got to build off of that. You got to understand they're coming down here. They're on the road. It'll be a little bit warmer. You got to put that, in the head of the players. And you got to go out there and say, hey, we get our stops early defensively. They're going to make their plays. It's just how we adjust and make our corrections both on the sidelines and at halftime and keep going. You can't give up. And again, attack the ball, make sure tackles, and go from there.
Yeah, I think you look at the success that they had running the ball. And now we've broken out this heavy personnel. I don't know if Julian Hill's going to be able to go this week or not, but whether he can or can't go, your best personnel grouping the past 2 weeks has been when you've loaded up and gone heavy, and you fell behind 14-3 or 14-6 against Baltimore. And we were acting like we were down 4 touchdowns, and we kind of surrendered what we felt like was a big part of what was so consistently working. So Buffalo historically has been a team that plays light up front. They're not going to have their best penetrator in Ed Oliver. He has a injury that has him down. He's going to miss most of the rest of the regular season, if not all of it. They just lost Michael Hoyt, who didn't play in the first game, but he was a free agent signing from the Rams, who tore his Achilles. Really unique player with a lot of point of attack stuff that really could have offset what Miami wants to do, getting the ball outside. So they're down some bodies up front, and they're historically a team that's content to play you light as the Dolphins and say, hey, we're going to dare you to play a patient, methodical football game and keep running the ball. And you want to push the ball down the field. We're going to either intercept your passes or clog your throwing lanes and force check down 6 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, where you can run for 10 yards, but it's a 4-yard gain, right? So I think that's it for me, is from a play calling perspective. Don't call a game to try to score 30 points. Call a game to limit the possessions. Call a game to keep Josh Allen on the sideline. Call a game to win the time of possession battle and be a little bit more conservative so you don't have turnovers that set up short fields and self-inflicted wounds. If you do that, I think that's how you give yourself a chance to win this football game.
And I should say that Bosa and Jones and James Cook, by the way, are all listed as questionable, but they'll probably play more than likely. And I want to wrap it up with this, guys. And Z, you first. When the Dolphins play the Bills, everybody talks about Josh Allen, but James Cook's been huge this year, and the Dolphins have not come close to stopping him or the Bills' running game. You look at what they just did balance-wise against Kansas City with Allen and with Cook. It's really looking good in Buffalo offensively right now, and the Dolphins haven't had any luck against either of them or the run game, you know what I mean, against anybody this year. So you want to run the ball yourself, but you have to find a way to stop them on some possessions. And to me, coming out like they did against the Ravens execution-wise, as opposed to, man, they look so good until they got in the red zone. They looked so good early on, so clean, so crisp in that game until they got in the red zone. Should have been up by at least 2 touchdowns at halftime. The defense played really well. Baltimore wasn't running the ball anywhere in the first half. So there's a lot to build on between that and the Atlanta game in terms of cleaning up all the mistakes and just executing for this team this week, Z.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. The run game's going to be big, especially our run defense. We're going to have to shore it up there big time, because this O-line is good. I think they're probably the second best O-line in the league right now, and they're doing some good things up front, and that back is putting some numbers up, but we've been good against the run up until, end of last game, when the King finally got his rushes in. But before that, Atlanta, we shut them down, and we just got to look at that and build off of that, and just play solid run defense to even have a chance, to even, having any hope. We got to stop that run first.
Kyle, what do you want to see the most this week against the Bills as you take us home here on the Squad Show?
I want to see Ollie Gordon run over Jordan Poyer in the hole. That's what I want. I saw turn on this last Bills game and saw Jordan Poyer out there playing defense for Buffalo. And after last year and then all the things Jordan Poyer's had to say, hey, if we win, I'm never going to be mad about a win. I'm going to be gassed up about a win over the Bills. If we lose, I'll sit here and put on my copium hat and we'll talk about the NFL draft and being one loss closer to a high draft pick and some changes. But just give me Ollie Gordon running Jordan Poyer over in the hole one time, and I will be a fulfilled man on the post-game show. I promise you that.
I want to make all those Buffalo fans sweat, literally and figures. They're going to sweat literally. They're going to sweat like the hogs they are coming down here to South Florida, and kind of like how Charles Barkley feels about the San Antonio people. That's the Buffalo people coming to South Beach. They are Buffaloes, half of them. But I'll say this, okay, Bills Mafia, whatever you think you are, celebrating like you won the Super Bowl when you finally beat the Chiefs. I think the Dolphins are going to make this a very competitive game and make those Bills fans sweat. They really are. And I think that they're going to be competitive into the fourth quarter. I don't know that they're going to win, but I think they're going to push the Bills and give them everything they can handle. They got a little bit of burst of wind in their sails with everything that's happened this week, and they're playing for their futures and their coach's future as well. So I think we're going to see a bunch of that. You guys good? You got anything else to add before we wrap it, or you think we call it a wrap on the Squad Show this week?
Good to go.
We're good.
All right, we'll be here on Sunday. So what the game is a 1:00 game. So we'll be here right around 4:15-ish with the Squad Show post-game edition. Until then, keep watching and listening to Kyle Krabs, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Podbean, and, of course, Roku. And join the three of us post-game. Maybe they get a win over those stinking, rotten Buffaloes from Buffalo. We'll be with you right after the game with the Squad Show. Thanks so much for being here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.